following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being.
Hello and welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. We have lots lined up for you over the next 1 hour. Let's begin with our top story on the Israel-Hamas war. The much-anticipated release of 50 hostages in Hamas captivity in Gaza, which was expected to begin today, has been delayed at least until Friday. Israel and Hamas have agreed to a ceasefire for 4 days, aiming to facilitate the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza and the release of 50 hostages currently held by Hamas in exchange for 150 Palestinians jailed in Israel, all women and children. Israel's National Security Advisor Zachi Hanagbi said the start of the release will take place according to the original agreement between the sides and not before Friday. He added the negotiations on the release of our hostages are advancing and continuing constantly. White House spokesperson Adrian Watson said the agreement is on track and we're hopeful that the implementation will begin on Friday morning. A source in Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office has been quoted as saying, "No one said there would be a release on Thursday except the media. We had to make it clear that no release is planned before Friday because of the uncertainty that the hostages' families are facing." Israel's public broadcaster, Khanna, citing an unidentified Israeli official, reported that there was a 24-hour delay because the agreement had not been signed by Hamas and the mediator, Qatar. I beg your pardon. The officials said they were optimistic that the agreement would be carried out once it is duly signed. Despite the ceasefire agreement, there has been no let-up in the intense fighting. Reports say the Israeli aircraft and artillery struck Gaza's southern city of Khan Yunis in at least 2 waves and 15 people were killed. Attacks have also been reported in several other parts of Gaza, including the Jabalia and Nuseirat camps. Israel says it has carried out aerial strikes on over 300 Hamas targets over the past day. In another major development, the Israel military has arrested Mohammed Abu Salmiya, the director of the Al-Shifa hospital, the largest medical facility in Gaza, which has been at the heart of the Israel-Hamas war. Several senior doctors too have been detained. The arrests have given rise to concerns over the potential disruptions to critical healthcare services at the hospital, which is already crumbling under the Israeli assault. The Israeli military's incursion into the hospital complex took place last week. Israel maintains that Hamas terrorists have been using a tunnel network beneath the hospital for launching attacks. Both Hamas and hospital officials vehemently deny these claims. Israel in recent days has released a series of videos showing a tunnel shaft and a blast-proof door, as well as weaponry which they claim have all been found at and under the Al-Shifa hospital. In another decisive move amid the escalating tensions, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has instructed the country's external intelligence agency, the Mossad, to take aggressive action against Hamas even beyond the confines of Gaza. Netanyahu's announcement underscores his determination to target the top echelons of Hamas, who predominantly reside in exile, primarily in Qatar and Beirut. He said, "I've instructed the Mossad to act against the heads of Hamas wherever they are." Mossad's history of overseas operations, including targeted assassinations of Palestinian militants and Iranian nuclear scientists, amplifies the gravity of Netanyahu's directive in a bid to dismantle Hamas's command structure. In a conversation with US President Joe Biden, Netanyahu reiterated Israel's commitment to persist in its offensive against Hamas even after the temporary ceasefire. Netanyahu said, "I want to be clear. The war is continuing. We will continue it until we achieve all our goals."
המתווה שהושג לא יכלול שחרור רוצחים, והוא כן כולל הסכמה של נציגי הצלב האדום, לביקורים יותר נכון של נציגי הצלב האדום אצל החטופים והעברת תרופות אליהם. אני שמעתי שיש מי שכופר על זה. הצלב האדום אמר שהוא לא שמע, אז הנה הסעיף המפורש. יתאפשר לצלב האדום לבקר את יתר החטופים ולספק להם תרופות נחוצות, ואני מצפה שהצלב האדום יעשה את העבודה שלו. אנחנו מנצחים, ונמשיך להילחם עד לניצחון המוחלט.
All right, let's now move on to our next story, which is to do with India, the United States, and Khalistani elements. India has responded to the Financial Times story which claimed that the United States had recently thwarted a plot to kill Khalistani terrorist Gurpatwant Singh Pannun on American soil. India has stated that it is examining US inputs on the nexus between organized criminals, gun runners, terrorists and others. The statement from the Ministry of External Affairs says India takes such inputs seriously since it impinges on our own national security interests as well. Issues in the context of US inputs are already being examined by the relevant departments. Earlier in the day, the White House had said the US was treating a reported plot to kill a Sikh separatist on American soil with utmost seriousness and had raised the issue with the Indian government at the senior-most levels. Asked about the Financial Times report, White House spokesperson Adrian Watson said Indian counterparts had expressed surprise and concern and stated that activity of this nature was not their policy. We understand the Indian government is further investigating this issue and we will have more to say about it in the coming days. We've conveyed our expectation that anyone deemed responsible should be held accountable. Quoting unnamed sources, the Financial Times had carried a report saying the US informed India about concerns regarding an alleged plot to kill Gurpatwant Singh Pannun, the founder of the band Sikhs for Justice. The report said the US authorities also issued a warning to India over concerns that the government in New Delhi was involved. Pannu is a dual citizen of the United States and Canada. Now, this report came 2 months after Canada claimed that there were credible allegations linking Indian agents to the murder of Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar in June. India rejected the allegation and sought evidence from Canada. On Monday, India's premier anti-terror organization, the National Investigation Agency, filed a case against Pannun, accusing him of issuing social media threats, claiming that people flying Air India were in danger. He had also claimed that Air India would not be allowed to operate on the 19th of November. Let's now look at the Financial Times story in some more detail. It says it's not clear whether America's protest to New Delhi led the plotters to abandon their plan or whether the FBI intervened and foiled a scheme already in motion. The US informed some allies about the plot following the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Khalistani terrorist and Canadian citizen killed in Vancouver in June. In September, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said there were credible allegations linking New Delhi to Nijjar's fatal shooting. A source has been quoted as saying the US protest was issued after Prime Minister Narendra Modi made a high-profile state visit to Washington in June. Separate from the diplomatic warning, US federal prosecutors have filed a sealed indictment against at least one alleged perpetrator of the plot in a New York district court. The US Justice Department is debating whether to unseal the indictment and make the allegations public or wait until Canada finishes its investigation into Nijjar's murder. The report also claims that one person charged in the indictment is believed to have left the US. The US Justice Department and the FBI have declined to comment on the matter. The National Security Council said the US does not comment on ongoing law enforcement matters or private diplomatic discussions with our partners, but added upholding the safety and security of US citizens is paramount. Washington shared details of the Pannun case with a wider group of allies after Trudeau went public with details of the Vancouver killing, the combination of which sparked concern among allies about a possible pattern of behavior. As we said, India has rejected Canada's claims about New Delhi's possible involvement in Nijjar's murder as absurd and politically motivated. Pannun issued yet another threat this month by issuing a video in which he warned Sikhs not to fly Air India because it would be life-threatening. Washington has urged India to cooperate with the Canadian investigation but has not expressed any criticism of New Delhi. Financial Times goes on to say the Biden administration views India, a member of the Quad security group along with Japan and Australia, as a critical part of a broader strategy to counter China. The report claims that officials in the Biden administration were aware that any public disclosure of the US plot and Washington's protest to New Delhi would renew questions about India's reliability as a trusted partner. Remember, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was feted this summer in Washington, where he delivered a speech to the US Congress. President Joe Biden said the US-India relationship would be one of the defining partnerships of the 21st century. There have earlier been reports, though, suggesting that Biden raised the Canadian allegations with Prime Minister Modi at the G20 summit held in New Delhi in September. The White House declined to say whether Biden raised the Pannun case at that time. US Ambassador to Canada David Cohen also said in September that Ottawa had received information about the Niger case from the intelligence sharing network Five Eyes, which comprises the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand and Canada. India has accused Canada, the UK and other countries with large Indian diaspora communities of being too tolerant of members of the Sikh separatist movement, many of whom are designated terrorists in India and wanted in multiple cases. During a visit to Washington in September, India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar stated at an event that Ottawa had a very permissive attitude towards Sikh separatists because of Canadian politics. So what do these latest developments really mean? Let's discuss this with our panel of experts. Joining me on the show tonight, Ambassador K.P. Fabian, former Indian diplomat, Yashovardhan Azad, former Special Director with the Intelligence Bureau. They join us from New Delhi, and completing the panel tonight is Irina Sukerman, National Security Analyst. She joins us live from New York. Thank you so much to all three of my guests for joining me. Yashovardhan Azad, let me begin with you. Right on this show, a few weeks ago, we discussed and debated ad nauseum Justin Trudeau's wild allegations against India, accusing it of being involved in the killing of Niger, which happened in the month of June. Now you have this Financial Times report claiming that the US thwarted a plot to assassinate Pannun on American soil, and that this is a matter that has been raised by the US authorities with New Delhi, and New Delhi has taken cognizance of it and said, we take this matter very seriously. But at the same time, New Delhi has told the United States that we are surprised by these reports because this is not our official policy. The waters seem to have been really muddied in all of this. What do you make of this latest report?
Well, in terms of the contents of the allegations or the act which is being alluded to, the Indians, I think we have the same kind of information we had on Niger, which is with respect to Pannun too. So it is very difficult to comment, though the additional information which you've given is that they have moved the court also in New York against a particular individual. And the only thing is that they don't want to make it public right now because they don't want to talk about the law enforcement actions, and which sort of falls in the diplomatic area. Now, mind you, I don't understand this connection, waiting the case to unravel before, commenting on this or saying something about this. Because in the case of Niger, since you refer to Financial Times, Washington Post had come out, with an article which said that the investigation into the case of appeared a little, wanting in respect of professional requirements. Even the people who are around the area but not really questioned. We haven't got any credible evidence as such against individuals. So far, the thing is, again, in a kind of a labyrinth of various, subterfuges and allegations. Now, in this particular case, I would have been very happy if the Americans would have also unraveled the plot behind his statement in which he said that from 19, the Sikhs should not fly near India. And especially with the past, the Kanishka bombing extremely important because Pannun is a known India beta from the 6th January, where he announced lakhs of money for cutting off the head of, various personages, constitutional people in India, or funding extremist activities in Punjab. It would be extremely important for us to collaborate with the American agencies to find out what is he actually up. In fact, Sikh for Justice is behind almost every activity in Punjab which is against the state or against the nation. By and by, these things are being unraveled, which is being looked at by the national investigative agencies. So my final comment would be that yes, they have made an allegation. The MEA has given a proper formal reply that we look into it, because this kind of a nexus between the terrorists, organized criminals, is something to be looked at. And especially when India is being affected and impacted severely because of these activities in Canada and America, this is an important thing.
Yashwardhan Azad, all right, we seem to be having a bit of a problem there with that link to Azad. Let me see if we can get him back on air. Mr. Azad, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I believe you have to leave the show in a couple of minutes. So I just want to ask you a couple of quick questions. I think you make a very valid point. We're talking about a man who has openly issued threats to Indians, not once, but several times over, including in recent months, whether it was, targeting Indian diplomats in Canada, or telling Sikhs not to fly Air India on the 19th of November. I think you're absolutely right that since he's a citizen of both Canada and the United States, Canada and the US should explain to India why this man is getting away with making these sort of threats. These should be answerable to us for that, and I wonder if that's already been raised by Dr. Jaishankar with his American counterpart. But the question that I want to put to you is this: do you find it interesting that India's response to the Canadian allegations was very different from the kind of measured and nuanced response that has been issued to the Financial Times story and to what the US officials seem to be claiming? Because on that occasion, India said this is absurd, it's politically motivated, we do not act in this fashion. Where is the evidence? In this case, India is saying we take this very seriously, this impacts our national interest as well, and we are going to look into this matter. Why do you think this difference in India's response between then and now?
Well, there's a reason. We have had problems with Canada for a long time. Mind you, Canada has been also sheltering the LTT militants and their financing, and the Lankan government was extremely upset. And so we've had this problem right from the beginning, from the Kanishka bombing case, where it was not looked into properly. And later on, even the commission said that it was a very shoddy kind of an operation. So given the relation of this kind, I think our reaction was very, very strong. In the case of US is a strategic partner. And we are collaborating with the United States on so many, many things. And I would say that we share much, much more important things strategically for us to give that kind of information. And I think on that count, because we consider, we take US very, very seriously, and we are the strategic partners, and that's why we have given this reaction. Yes, we will look into it, and I hope we also collaborate on other security matters, which I have pointed out just now.
Final question, Mr. Azad, before we let you go. What do you make of this development that Financial Times has reported, where it says that, US federal prosecutors have filed a sealed indictment against one alleged perpetrator of this plot in a New York district court, and the US Justice Department is debating whether to unseal the indictment and make the allegations public or wait for Canada to finish its investigation into Nijar's murder. And let's not forget that there is this whole Five Eyes network which is also at play here?
Well, I said earlier that I don't understand this connection between Niger case and Pannun case. If there is something you have a real credible evidence, I think you can just go ahead. I mean, one thing is good that they have not sort of unsealed it. They are not bringing it out in the open because there are these conditions of, the sensitivities involved, whether it's diplomatic, security-wise, and otherwise. But I would say that if you're finding anything like that, I mean, you just go ahead. So in this case, I think the answer has been appropriate, that we'll collaborate on this particular issue. And yes, the person being referred to, it's also mentioned that he had left the country. If it's alluding to a diplomat or somebody I'm not aware of. So the lack of information on these two cases, prevents from making some very, substantive judgment on this particular case. We will definitely, wait for more information on this count.
We certainly need more information on that note. Yashovardhan Azad, thank you so much for joining us on Global Lens. As always, a pleasure to have you on the show. Let me now go across to my other guests. Irina Sukuman, if I could come to you now. What more can you tell us about this Financial Times report, which claims that the US thwarted a plot to assassinate this man called Pannun, who, by the way, is a designated terrorist in India, and he has very publicly issued threats to Indians on multiple occasions. This is not a matter of secret. But, I just read out an excerpt from the Financial Times report that the US Justice Department is debating whether to unseal the indictment that they filed in a New York district court in this particular matter, whether to make it public, whether to wait for Canada to complete its investigation. We don't know, as our previous speaker said, whether the Niger case in Canada and the Pannun case in the US are even linked. But what do you think is really going on here, especially with regard to federal prosecutors in the US filing this indictment in the New York District Court? What more can you tell us about that?
Well, this whole story comes at a time when another publication, The Diplomat, reported the deaths of several Khalistani extremists under mysterious circumstances in other countries, essentially establishing a pattern of somebody going after these individuals and raising the question of whether India has, quote-unquote, an assassination program. Whether such an assassination program exists or not, it's very clear that intelligence agencies all over the world have a policy of not letting active threats, trying to prevent active threats from materializing, and that includes occasionally taking them out before they come to fruition. What makes a difference here is that US is an ally of India. It takes its national sovereignty concerns very seriously, and of course this matter is extremely sensitive, which is why there is a reluctance to politicize the issue by debating it in public and by unsealing this indictment, especially since US has already raised those concerns during the Canada investigation, and if this case has been, if this attempted assassination happened at all, and if it happened at the same time, concurrently to the Canadian event, and not at some point later after those discussions were already being held, there seems to be no reason to bring it up from the US government's perspective now, if that has already been handled, if it's not a new event where discussions were ignored and so forth and so on. So US is trying to limit political damage, it's trying to prevent publicity from deteriorating relations. The question is how did the US how did the Financial Times get a hold of this discussion to begin with? Why is it bringing it up now as opposed to closer to the time when these events and discussions allegedly occurred? Now, there is a very good point that was made earlier, which is this individual made what appeared to be an active threat, a terrorist attack. And there, in general, political operatives, separatists, and so forth in US and Canada are treated as political dissidents as a position so long as their political positions are peaceful. If they engage in political dialogue over a creation of a new state, they are considered legitimate opposition and are granted protection. But once they cross the line into any sort of involvement in subversive and violent activity, they lose the right to that sort of protection. Now, this individual is a U.S. Citizen. He would be entitled to due legal process in the United States up until the point that he made this concrete threat. There has not been any publication in the media in the US alleging that he was involved in anything encouraging violence. Arrest multiple times. It may be an issue of legal differences that India assesses terrorism and involvement in terrorism differently, or it may be that the evidence that this individual, that Pannun, was involved directly in violent and subversive activity exists, but it has not been presented to the public in the United States. That has become a problem because now it's difficult to argue, to make the case to the public that the US government has known for years that this individual is not merely a peaceful dissident, that he is in fact a terrorist who's been involved in plotting attacks which took place in India, and we have seen violence over the summer.
You make a very important point there, Irina. This is not just some dissident or a peaceful dissident, as you put it. The man has been designated a terrorist in India. He is wanted in multiple cases of murder and terror-related activities in India. This is a man who is on record as having issued threats to Indian diplomats. He's called for their assassination on Canadian soil. He issued a threat to Air India saying, you know, the flights could be dangerous, so Sikhs should stay away. I mean, this is a man who's repeatedly issuing threats to India and Indians. And surely the countries whose citizen he is, Canada and the United States, need to answer for that. But let me go across to my other Indian guest now, Ambassador Fabian. Sir, what exactly is going on here? Frankly, this is getting very, very murky. We've discussed for weeks here Canada's allegations against India in the Niger case. Now you have this report which says the US may have made similar allegations against India in the Pannun case. Here we're talking about a so-called plot to assassinate this man who is a designated terrorist in India. We don't know who's raised the matter with whom. Did President Biden raise it with Prime Minister Modi during the G20 summit in September? You know, has Antony Blinken taken it up with Jay Shankar? It is completely shrouded in secrecy. This is a report that's come out in the Financial Times for the first time, and India has issued a response saying, we take this seriously, we're going to investigate it. But what do you think is going on here, considering that Canada and the US are obviously very, very close partners and allies and part of the Five Eyes network, and this whole network of Khalistani separatists, hardliners and terrorists operating in multiple Western countries, especially Canada, has been a thorn in India's side for a very long time. And now India is constantly being accused of going after them on foreign soil, even though nobody's yet produced any concrete evidence to back those claims.
Thank you. I want to make one or two points. That is, there is a difference between what the US has said and what Canada did. The United States has acted, in my view, more responsibly. Instead of making a statement in the House of Commons, as Prime Minister Trudeau did, the United States has diplomatically conveyed to India something. That is point number one. Point number two is that India has responded in the US related matter differently than it responded in the Canada related matter. And point number three is that United States federal prosecutors have already filed a case in the New York District Court, as you said, in a sealed envelope, and the American authorities are considering whether the envelope should be unsealed or not. Now, here I want to share a speculation with you, because the United States has been asking India to cooperate with Canada in regard to the investigation of the Niger matter. Now, is the United States telling India that if you cooperate with Canada to our satisfaction, then we shall not be unsealing the envelope? As I said, this is only a speculation. But also, I wanted to raise a question. If Financial Times has reported something, obviously someone in the know of things, someone in authority has been giving that information. So I take it, again this is only speculation, that in the United States government, they had taken a decision to part with that information to Financial Times. And as you mentioned, later Adrian Watson, White House spokesperson, came out with a statement. So that is where we are. I think it is important for India to sort of cooperate with the United States, and also, let me repeat, cooperate with Canada, so that since India is not part of India's policy, since India had nothing to do with, this murder of Niger and this plot which is allegedly to have been thwarted. So let things come out. India has nothing to fear, but India should not give the impression that it is reluctant or slow to cooperate.
Another question for you, Ambassador, before I go back to our American guest. Financial Times, in a sense, quotes unnamed sources in the US, officials, I'm guessing, who say that the series of cases that have emerged in recent months seem to indicate a pattern of behavior. Again, an accusation against India, even though India is on record as having saying this is not our state policy. What should be made of it? Because this is being linked to a series of other incidents in Canada, even Pakistan, where a lot of Khalistani extremists in the last couple of years have died. Most of those cases were actually seen as instances of inter-gang rivalries. But what do you make of these constant accusations being made against India now? I mean, this is a first in many ways. We've never seen this before.
Well, to my mind, if American sources, quote unquote, have told the Financial Times about this pattern of behavior, I doubt whether they are worried about what is happening in Pakistan or elsewhere in this part of the world. They are worried about what is happening in North America and, let me repeat, what might happen in Australia, New Zealand, and United Kingdom. The Five Eyes. That is what they are worried about. And they seem to believe, whether they have good reasons to come to that conclusion or not is a different matter. But they seem to believe that there might be a pattern of behavior, and India has to take note of it and act accordingly, responsibly, so that any such misinformation or misimpression, wrong impression is, cleared out. You know what I mean? We don't want any such misimpression.
Okay. Irina, let me come back to you. The ambassador is, of course, right in saying that, even if there are concerns over this matter in the US seems to have acted with much greater maturity than Canada did. And if you look at it, India's response has also been a very measured and nuanced one. While we were very dismissive of the Canadian allegations, and remember, we have a history of strained ties with Canada because we do believe that Canada has been tacitly encouraging the secessionist movement on its soil for domestic political reasons. Our relationship with the US is very different. We are very strong partners today. And India has not dismissed these allegations. It said it's going to look into it. it is a serious matter. It concerns our national security interests as well. But you know, there are a couple of questions here. Why, you know, is the world not willing to accept that a lot of these men, whether you call them Khalistani separate, may well have died as a result of inter-gang rivalries, because this is not something new. This is known to have happened in the past within the Khalistani movement, and it happens in general around the world. Plus, as you rightly pointed out, just as India is asked to explain its stance, you know, on these various allegations that are suddenly being leveled against us, I think India also has the right to demand an explanation from Canada and the US as to how their citizen is being allowed to get away with murderous threats being issued quite brazenly to Indians.
Quite frankly, there is a lot of very permissive attitude to people engaged in quote-unquote dissident activity in the West. And I don't need to give you examples. It's true as much for various Islamist extremists as it is for the Khalistanis. And there's been a reluctance to engage in passing judgment on political issues that and political rivalries that take place in other countries. That position needs to change as US, Canada, and others are seeking to form closer relations with those countries. If they don't at some point draw a red line over what is legitimate political activity and what is extremism or terrorism, they are going to find themselves in a very difficult spot with respect to diplomatic relations, if nothing else, not to mention their own security. Having said that, no country in the world will ever be happy if they believe that a foreign intelligence agency is operating on their soil and going after their citizens. Prime Minister Netanyahu recently made a claim that Israel is going to go after Hamas in other countries, and which is a legitimate threat Hamas is a legitimate threat to Israel, but not one country is ever going to formally give Israel approval to do so. And if they are caught doing that, the reaction is going to be very much similar, even if Hamas is outright considered a terrorist organization. The Khalistanis have not yet reached that level of threat in the eyes of the US, Canada, and others. My suggestion to change this outlook, to change this perception, and to reach a point where India can cooperate with the Five Eyes and other countries on treating these individuals as a legitimate threat and taking their activities seriously, and without having to resort to debates about whether there was an assassination or not, is to provide the sort of very public information base for the voters, for the people in those countries, informing them about the connection between these Khalistani organizations and the attacks, murders, and so forth taking place on India's soil. Once people are publicly aware of a threat, there is a public pressure to take it more seriously, and there is a pressure to designate such networks as terrorist organizations. There is a political process. It can be lengthy, but once the US decides to sanction an organization, it does start taking these threats much more seriously, as we have seen with Al-Qaeda and Hamas, Hezbollah, and many others. And I think that is the best path going forward, because there is always going to be a difference in opinion over law, over facts, and so forth, but not when there is a continuous dialogue over security, not when there is a burden of evidence, and not when there is very bad publicity associated with defending such individuals as Pannun.
Irina, you make an excellent point, and I can tell you that we have discussed this issue multiple times in the context of Canada's allegations against India, the duplicity of the West that we see when it comes to matters of terror. And I want to put that question to Ambassador Fabian as we wrap up this discussion. Ambassador Fabian, looking at the larger picture, I've put this question to you in the past. Irina has very rightly brought it up because she's been on my show multiple times to discuss the Israel-Hamas war. I mean, okay, fine, I'm not comparing the Khalistani movement with the Hamas movement. But in general, we've seen that there is a selective approach by the West. There is this duplicity that seems to suggest our terrorists are terrorists, while your terrorist could be just an innocent dissident or crusader.
Well, I agree with you that the West has not looked at this matter holistically, because terrorism is something which humanity should fight unitedly, and there is no question of well, what terrorists do in country A, well, that is not of concern to us, so long as these terrorists do not come to us in the north, so that is the wrong attitude. I think it is important to have the philosophy of Vasudevaiga Kudumbagam. Terrorist anywhere is a threat to everyone. But it has to be tackled in an intelligent, holistic way. And let us hope that the international community will make more progress in that direction.
Well, we certainly hope so. Remember, there is a major war raging right now in this world, the Israel-Hamas war that we've all been talking about ad nauseum for the last 2 months. That has terrorism at its heart. Therefore, it is time the West stopped being selective when it came to matters of terrorism. On that note, Ambassador Fabian and Irina Sukerman, thank you so much for joining me on Global Lens.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Time for us to take a quick break here on Global Lens, but don't go anywhere. We have lots more for you on the other side, including the never-ending twists and turns in the OpenAI and Sam Altman saga.
With all this gear, you must be wondering if I'm climbing a mountain. Well, let me give you a wider look of this place. This is Asia's largest mountain of shame.
A mountain of waste, almost the height of the Qutub Minar.
When you enter capital cities of some of the biggest countries in the world, you don't have 3 garbage mountains waiting to welcome you, depending on whichever side of the city you enter from.
The thing is that a lot of times we talk about landfills only when there's a fire at the landfill. You need to understand that a landfill is at fire almost throughout the year. It's only when the firefighters are not able to douse the fire is when it actually catches the nation's attention.